Hello, I'm glad you're here. I have something I want to run by you and see what you think about it. Now, I have to warn you up front that some parts of it are a little bit on the woo-woo side, but if you can get past that, then I promise I'll level this thing out and try to land the plane on solid ground. I'll go through all my reasoning on this, but basically, I believe that we are at the very beginning of a scientific revolution that will result in a paradigm shift that changes the way we think about reality. I believe the way we will come to understand reality and the universe will allow for very normal explanations for what we now call paranormal phenomena. And when that happens, paranormal will become our new normal. If you've been following the UAP phenomenon, or if you know about Stargate, the government's remote viewing program, or perhaps you're familiar with the Telepathy Tapes podcast, then you've probably realized that according to our current scientific model, they're all impossible. This is problematic, and there's only two ways to account for it. Either none of these things are really happening, or we're left with the uncomfortable fact that our current scientific model is incorrect, or at the very least, incomplete. This isn't something that's openly discussed very often, but it's also not exactly disputed. No one would argue that we know all there is to know about the universe. Now, there are practical reasons for maintaining the stability of our current scientific model, and for not overturning scientific paradigms unless you absolutely have to. Thomas Kuhn describes this all very nicely in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. I believe that we are on the brink of a scientific revolution right now. And if I'm right about this, then everything we currently understand about reality and our place in the universe is about to get turned on its head, and nothing will ever be the same again. It's too soon to say what's going to replace our current model, but there are a number of physicists around the world who are currently working on some fascinating possibilities. These are respected scientists, and their theories are being seriously considered. I can tell you right now that many of the new models under consideration provide a framework which would allow for a plausible way of explaining much of what we currently label as paranormal. I don't know how soon it will happen, but when it does, the paranormal will become our new normal, and that changes everything. I hope you'll join us on this investigation. I'll keep it grounded without being dull, and the conclusions we come to are significant because, we've got a lot to do, so let's get started. The first thing we need to discuss is the way in which scientific understanding progresses over time. In the structure of scientific revolutions, Thomas Kuhn suggests that what really happens is that we go through long periods of stagnation and slow progress where everyone is doing what he calls normal science. Not much new is going on. No one is coloring outside of the lines or thinking outside of the box. This is fine. This is how things should be. Coloring outside of the lines isn't particularly helpful. It's a waste of time and resources, and it should be discouraged. Kuhn describes what he calls anomalies. These are observations or events which the current scientific paradigm can't account for. Ignoring the anomalies doesn't make them go away. Over time, they begin to pile up until eventually there's too many of them to ignore, and we have to acknowledge what they're telling us. They are an indication that we need to revise our scientific model in some way that will account for the anomaly. To accommodate the anomalies, it will have to be fundamentally different than what preceded it. Kuhn calls this a paradigm shift, and it represents the wholesale adoption of a radically new perspective, one that changes the way we see the world we live in. Humanity went through just such a revolution when Copernicus's theory of heliocentrism supplanted Ptolemaic astronomy. This was difficult for many people to accept. Philosophers and scientists were literally burned at the stake for supporting such utter hogwash. Galileo developed the telescope that would prove Copernicus's claims. Even then, there were many people who were not willing to give up their old beliefs, and it took many years for the heliocentric model to become the accepted understanding of how the solar system operated. When Charles Darwin described the mechanism for biological evolution, when Sir Isaac Newton gave us calculus, when Louis Pasteur described germ theory to the world, and when Albert Einstein gave us the general theory of relativity. These discoveries were different, They required a radical new way of seeing the world, and they are not the sort of thing that you just stroll lightly into. Scientific revolutions aren't common. They only happen when it becomes absolutely necessary. Kuhn calls this sudden expansion of human knowledge a paradigm shift, and we are at the very early stages of one right now. The theory being replaced is known as scientific materialism, or sometimes physicalism. It holds that everything in the universe is made up of physical matter and nothing else. The Italian-American physicist Federico Faggin asserts that this cannot possibly be true. He explains his position in great detail in his latest book, Irreducible: Consciousness, Life, Computers, and Human Nature. There are other competing theories aside from Federico Faggin's quantum information panpsychism. Donald Hoffman and Bernardo Castro both have some intriguing ideas around this topic. What will the new theory of everything look like? I can't say. What I can say for sure is that the revolution will lead us into some unknown territory, and it will change the world forever. I'll be honest here, I didn't exactly invent the idea that we're headed into a scientific revolution. In 2014, a group of scientists convened a summit in Tucson, Arizona to discuss the future of scientific inquiry. One of the things that came out of that summit was the Manifesto for a Post-Materialist Science. The manifesto advocates for a shift from materialist to post-materialist science, proposing that consciousness and mind are fundamental aspects of reality and not reducible to physical processes. I'll leave a link to the manifesto in the description in case any of you would like to look at it for yourselves. The points they make are reasonable, unambiguous, and difficult to refute. I'm convinced that a scientific revolution is inevitable. Another theory that I thought looked interesting was the electric universe theory. Okay, now we're getting to the fun stuff. Let's talk about anomalies. According to Thomas Kuhn, anomalies are observations or experimental results that contradict the dominant scientific paradigm, failures of the current system, that when they accumulate, trigger a crisis leading to a scientific revolution. Initially, scientists tried to ignore, resist, or explain away anomalies in order to protect the existing scientific framework. When anomalies persist and accumulate, they can no longer be dismissed as experimental error. This is what we see happening with scientists signing on to the Manifesto for a Post-Materialist Science. The crisis cannot be solved by patching up the old theory. A paradigm shift is needed, abandoning the old theory for a new one which can account for the anomalies. In our current situation, this would mean abandoning scientific materialism in favor of something like Federico Faggin's quantum information panpsychism, which has consciousness as a fundamental property of the universe. A consciousness-first model would, of course, create a pathway toward explaining things like telepathy, remote viewing, NDEs, and precognition. Consensus for our current paradigm shift is growing. From the original 8 scientists who drafted the Manifesto for a Post-Materialist Science, there are now hundreds of signatures from scientists all over the world where I think we will see it continue to grow and gather support until eventually we get a paradigm shift and the paranormal becomes our new normal. It's sometimes referred to as a controversy, but it isn't really a controversy. The so-called controversy is that mainstream scientists say they don't believe it. This doesn't exactly fit the description of a controversy, but it does describe the scientific anomalies we were just talking about, and they're piling up quickly. Mainstream scientists openly admit that they have no way of explaining these kinds of phenomena. They're scientific anomalies, and they require a new scientific paradigm to account for them. Well, I've looked at the situation and I keep seeing the same thing. There's a scientific revolution on the horizon and it's going to be here soon. And on the other side of it, we're going to see the paranormal become our new normal. Well, that's it for today, folks. Until next time, remember that I love you and stay furious. All power to the people.